Welcome back to the Feminine Manifesto podcast. Today, we're going to be discussing a topic very pertinent to not only our political landscape, but our religious landscape too, and that is of Islam. Discussing Islam and all that is involved with it can seem quite a daunting task. As Christians, we hear about Christians and others being persecuted overseas by Islamic groups, and it does inject a lot of fear. Fear knowing our religions and beliefs conflict majorly with this religion and what that means for us. And so it can make us go quiet. We allow this fear to hinder us in interacting with Muslims and evangelizing to them. However, this is a wrong response for us to have as Christians. We know the truth of Jesus Christ. He has set us free from our sin, and to not share this, well, firstly, it is disobedient to Christ's command to us, and it is unloving to our neighbors. I am not an expert in religion, and since the Bondi attacks, I've been looking into Islam further to try and understand it more. And I've set myself a challenge to be intentional about interacting and evangelizing to Muslims when I see them. But in doing so, I found myself lacking a lot of knowledge and knowing how to effectively do this well. So with all that in mind, today I am interviewing someone who comes with a wealth of knowledge in interacting with Muslims and evangelizing to them. He has been doing street evangelism for over a decade, was a full-time evangelist, recently completed a Bachelor of Theology, and today is going to be talking to us about Islam and how to effectively evangelize to Muslims. So welcome to the Feminine Manifesto podcast, Matt.
Thanks, Heather. Glad to be here.
It's good to have you on. Can you start by telling us a bit about who you are, what you do, and what your history has been with interacting with Muslims?
Yeah, well, who I am, probably the first descriptor is that I'm a Christian, I'm a child of God, and that really shapes everything about how I think about life. And that I became a Christian about 13 years ago or so now. And one of the early things that happened in my Christian walk was a desire to see other people hear about and know the God who transformed my life. And so early days, I ended up with a good friend of mine doing some street ministry stuff. And from there, started discovering a whole host of other worldviews and ways people think about life. And one of the ones you run into often in Australia is Islam, especially just post Ramadan. The Muslims seem to come to Australia to have a break after their Ramadan fasting. And so, so I've 10, 15 years or so have engaged with, I'd say, 1,000 or more Muslims face to face, and had many conversations about who is God and who we are and what that looks like and how we can know and have a relationship with God. So, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. Great. So from my understanding with what I've researched with Islam, it was founded in 610 AD or around there. And since then, it has become the second most popular religion in the world. So ChatGPT said that there's 2.3 billion Christians in the world and 2 billion Muslims. Why do you think Islam has grown so much and is continuing to grow?
I think there's a lot of factors. You notice that most places where Islam has a high percentage of the population, it's very much a part of their culture. And so just being born into that causes people to identify with Islam as something that they see as part of their identity without them having to be drastically committed to it. I think that's part of it today and why it continues to grow today. You'll notice that even in Western Muslim families normally have much higher amount of children than most Western people. And so there's the development there. But I think if you look back in history in how Islam was propagated in its early days, far more aggressively, it was a military expansion rather than a religious or cultural expansion. But I think we're now just seeing the fruits of the roots that it took back then continuing to just develop by large amounts of people being born inside a system that they see no alternatives to.
Yeah, that's interesting because Christianity has been around ever since the foundation of the world, really, well, from Judaism. But it's fascinating looking at Islam and seeing how it has grown and looking at our own culture. So what would you say to the Christian who might be afraid of talking to and evangelizing to Muslims for a myriad of reasons?
Yeah, I see a few of the possible reasons someone would be worried about it is they're not sure what a Muslim thinks or believes about them or about the world.
Yeah.
They're not sure how they might be responded to if they start talking about things, and they're unsure about how they would share or what they would say. And maybe
Yep.
even they've tried talking to a Muslim and they've found that the Muslim starts sharing as much as they can with the Christian rather than having a dialogue. And so I think if those are the reasons why someone is fearful, how would you help yourself to not find those reasons overwhelming? I'd propose that the solution is to remember that you aren't the one who is doing the work of salvation. You're not the one who's
Mm.
ultimately the end goal of this. Rather,
Yep.
the glory of God is the end goal, and He is the one who is at work in people. I think that's helpful. Remembering that you aren't the one who makes the changes or the transformations in that person's heart, but your task is merely to represent God in the way that you think and speak and act and all those things. Your desire is to bring glory to God through your whole action rather than seeking to communicate everything with precision. I think that lowers the stakes and enables you to go, actually, I'm just going to go as a person, speaking to another person about the hope that I've found in this incredible Savior, to someone else who is in the same desperate position that I was in before Christ and therefore
Yep.
needs the same Savior.
Yep. Yep. That's helpful. And I think Islam, because there is a lot of different sects of it around the world,
Mm-hmm.
and there is a lot of politics involved with talking about Islam as well.
Mm-hmm.
We can just tend to become shut off and think, I'm not going to deal with that, because you do have to think through it more and you have to be prepared more. So can you give us a brief overview of the main points of Islam, how it was started, and how Muslims believe that they're saved?
Yes. Okay. That's quite a big topic, but I'll do my best to
Yes.
summarize it. And let's look at it primarily in contrast to Christianity, which is probably the way most people are coming at it. Because as Christians, we often assume that Muslims overlap with us way more than they actually do in the ways they think about how we get revelation from God and what that looks like. And so in Islam, their view of the Quran, their holy book, is that it is God's direct dictation given to Muhammad. And so you could actually say they view the Quran very similarly to the way we view Jesus, in that they think it's the expression of who God is.
Okay.
It's the exact, so it's not that, so in Christianity we think that God, by the work of His Spirit, uses people to record what ends up being the Bible, and God divinely inspires the people who are prophesying or whatever, while simultaneously using the ones who write it down and compile it to be providing us a final copy of the 66 books of the New Testament, that each of them accurately represent God through what happened and what took place. Whereas that's not the Islam view. The Islam view is that someone basically gets a transcript, and that transcript is what's given to us, that God is the one who authors it all. And so how does Islam start? Well, Muhammad basically claims to receive revelation from an angel who gives him this content, and he tries to memorize it. And then he goes to people, because the belief is that he's illiterate. He then goes to other people, teaches it to them so that they can recite it as well and write it down. And so that's basically the foundation of Islam, is that they believe God revealed explicitly, directly, this exact content for someone to then continue to propagate and pass on. And then from there, that basically makes the central document that is the foundation of all Muslim beliefs. But on top of that, then they have their hadiths and their teachers that begin from that to explain and develop these ideas.
Okay, I didn't know that fact, that Muhammad was illiterate. So
That's
the thought, is it?
That's the belief and the claim, that he didn't write it down himself at all. There's a lot more around that story, but that's probably sufficient for now.
Yes. Okay. And can you explain the difference briefly between, so we have the Quran, and then I know there's a lot of hadiths, and I know there's a lot of other literature as well. The Quran, from my understanding, is the highest form. That's what you've said, God has spoken. The hadiths are, can you explain what they are?
You could almost call them commentaries. They're something of people who are in and around Muhammad and slowly after Muhammad or shortly after Muhammad, their sort of commentary on either the contents of the Quran or additional information about thoughts and teachings.
Okay.
And so it's partially historical sort of recount, but it's also partially interpretive of the Quran.
Okay. Would they have the same authority as we hold commentaries? Like, we wouldn't hold commentaries as high, I would
Yeah.
say. Would you agree?
Yes, commentaries are below the Bible, significantly below, but I would say that Muslims would hold the hadiths higher because of what they are. They're not just someone after the fact commenting, it's someone who is in and around. And so the details and the data in the hadiths, they're happy to say are true and
Yep.
reliable. And that's where we got most of our understanding of Islam and a lot of the practices and the things that play out. Because I don't know if you've spent too much time in the Quran itself, but the Quran itself is quite a messy and hard to sort of work through book because it's not organized chronologically or thematically, and it's not telling one story. It's actually ordered, the surahs, the chapters in the Quran are ordered by length rather than by chronology. And so it's a messy book to understand. It's almost like you go for references rather than just reading it front to back to understand what's going on. And so the hadiths do a lot of clarifying around that stuff.
Okay. Yes. And I think that is where a lot of Christians, that's where I struggle when I'm starting to think through Islam, is I'm comparing it to the Bible because that's what I've known. And the Bible is a completely different book, that it is a chronological, or it's actually not quite chronological, but it's chronological in the terms of, it starts at Genesis and ends at Revelation and talking through up to Christ and all those sort of things. But the Quran, and I've heard James White say this as well, you can't just start at the beginning. You have to read different surahs.
Yep.
But I think in understanding all of this, it can then become so overwhelming when I see a Muslim or when somebody starts looking into it and then thinks, I don't know anything about this. So where should we start when we are interacting with Muslims?
Yeah, because you asked before some of their core beliefs, and I think this is really critical because maybe I'll add a bit of information about how Muslims are trained to interact with Christians, and that'll help navigate it. So a part of the 5 pillars of Islam, sort of their central teachings that all Muslims should do or should aspire to do. So Ramadan, their fasting is one of them, and their daily prayers is another one, and pilgrimage to Mecca is one. But one of them is called dawah, which is basically to communicate and try and convince others of the truth of Islam. And so if you start engaging with a Muslim, they're trained to actually try and turn the conversation away from you communicating stuff to them to instead them communicating stuff to you. And especially when they engage with Christians, they're often equipped with some big targets that seem incompatible with the central things that they think about who God is and who we are. And so if you start engaging with a Muslim, or if you're engaged with a Muslim for any length of time, you'll probably find out that they have issue with Jesus being God and human, and they'll have issue with God being there being one God who exists eternally as 3 distinct persons, and they're going to come up very quickly. And if those two don't come up, the third one is because they expect the Bible to be the same as the Quran, just as Christians often expect the Quran to be like the Bible. They'll take issue with the idea that the Bible has scribal errors and that sort of stuff from transmission over centuries. As scribal errors that we now know and can correct, but scribal errors nonetheless in different manuscripts at times. And so that's what a Muslim is thinking. And so what's the fundamental thing that they're trying to do is they're trying to convince you of the truth of their system. But where would I start? That's not where I'd start. And the reason I wouldn't start there is they're coming into a conversation where they think they have a correct answer, they have some ideas, and they actually don't see the need of Jesus being God, God being triune, or the way we understand Scripture. And so basically they've been given an antidote to these issues in the form of teaching that I think drastically misunderstands Christianity and actually causes it to be a hard place to start, especially if you're not well-versed in thinking about how to navigate and communicate the specifics of Christian doctrine over the last 2,000 years.
Yes.
And so where would I start? Actually trying to build a case for why these things must be true. So my hope in a conversation with a Muslim is to reach a position or a point in the conversation where they go, if what you're saying is true, then everyone deserves hell. That's what I'm hoping to get to. And once we get to that position, it's way easier to say then, yes, if we deserve hell and there's nothing we can do about it, the only person that could fix the problem, the only being that could fix the problem is God himself. So how does God do that? And so that's what I'm hoping to get to, because once they've got to that position, they're able to then actually see why God himself would come and deal with these things so that we could know him and have forgiveness. And so how do I try and get there? I try and get there by starting with questions about the nature of God, the nature of humanity, and start uncovering and unraveling the way they think about who we are, what we were designed for, what the purpose of this universe is, who God is, what he deserves, and stuff like that.
Yeah. It is helpful, and it's also brings up a lot more questions as well.
Yeah.
Because I've started to try and evangelize to Muslims more ever since the Bondi attacks last year. I thought I really need to learn more about Islam, and I really need to be, as all Christians should be doing, like we should be doing in our life, being wanting to share the gospel. And this is a religion that is growing. So we need to learn about it, and we need to actually be engaging with Muslims. And when I have been doing that this year, yes, I have found exactly what you're saying, that they struggle to understand the Trinity, which, to be fair, is quite a difficult thing to understand, even for Christians.
Absolutely. Yeah.
And Jesus being the Son of God. And also the idea that Allah is all merciful. So I've been having these conversations with them and saying, okay, trying to bring out to show what you have been showing, that we are all deserving of hell. But then they'll come back to me like, Allah is all merciful. He's all merciful, so he's able to wipe away sin. And so I'm trying to show sort of what you're saying, that God has to be just, that he can't just be all merciful and have no justice. But how do you practically go about that? So I'm seeing a Muslim on the street, or, you know, I was talking to a lady a couple of weeks ago at the markets. She ran a stall there. So I'm hoping to follow up with her. And we were talking about this, but practically, how do we go up to people and to bring up this conversation, really? Like, are there certain analogies that you would use that would help understand this?
Yeah. Basically, what I would say is I have to start with bigger or earlier building blocks than I expect to. Normally, when you're talking to someone who seems to be religious, it feels like there's more overlap. But I'd say, especially in the case of Muslims, but also with some other offshoots of Christianity, it's actually there's not as much overlap as you think. And so I think this is really critical to understand, is that the Muslim view of humanity is that our sinfulness is a result of weakness rather than a result of rebellion.
Okay.
And that's really critical. And so why is that problematic? Because then if sinfulness is weakness, there's actually nothing wrong with me.
Yep.
All that causes me to do wrong is the external circumstances around me, the temptations, the pressure of Satan, whatever it might be. And those things around me are what cause sin or draw sin out, because I'm unable to resist the pressure or the power they put upon me. And you can see this is worked out in the way that they practically live out their understanding of what is right and wrong and how it should be practiced. It's total abstinence, never go anywhere near it. It's total coverage so that there's never any opportunity. And so their morality is a logical flow from their understanding and their belief, but they're sincere in their desire to do good. I would say, in that they think they're following this system, but the reality is it's their view of humanity, and therefore what sin is and what causes it, that actually makes this disconnect. And so if you were to say, have you lied, or have you stolen, or have you been angry, or blah, 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 or whatever it might be, they go yes, but in saying yes, they're actually not admitting anything about themselves more than, I'm weak and I was in a scenario where I was overpowered by that which was powerful.
Okay.
And so you can see why would God have to fix this problem? Because I haven't rebelled. I haven't done anything wrong. I've
Yep.
just failed. I've slipped up. It's an accident or a mistake. And
Mm-hmm.
so I think that's a helpful thing. So the question then is, how do I help them understand that our sinfulness isn't accidental, but is rebellion?
Mm-hmm.
And that's where I start. And so how do I do that? I think there's a number of pieces in play, but I think I need to talk about sin as more than just actions that are wrong. I need to understand sin more fully in Christian theology as a problem with who I am, a problem of my heart and my motives that then demonstrate themselves in outward. And so a simple way to do that is to ask them, when you told a lie, why did you do it? When you stole, why did you do it? And that can start to bring up some things. Oh, I was choosing to do it to get out of trouble, or I wanted this and so I took it. And so
Mm-hmm.
that's a starting position that you can start developing a little bit of, okay, this is willful, and then pointing that out. So when you did that, it wasn't that you accidentally fell into something that you couldn't resist. Rather, you knew what it was, you knew that it was wrong, and you willfully chose to do it anyway. And so there's a starting point.
Okay.
Now we're beginning to build out a picture of what sin is. An addition to that is looking even at motives for why you do the right thing. And so people go, well, I told the truth, or I gave to someone, or whatever. And if I look at the motives underneath the good actions I do, the right actions, oh, well, why did you do that? Because it was going to benefit me. It made me look good. And so
Yep.
I've started to build this picture of, I do things that outwardly I shouldn't do and outwardly I should do. But underneath, what's going on in my heart is what serves me, what serves my ends,
Mm.
my desires, and my goals. And so once I start painting that picture, I've got a picture of humanity now that I think is more accurate than the
Yep.
picture of humanity Islam presents. And
Mm.
it's more dire. But now how
Mm.
do I bring that to a head? How do I start pushing that upon someone's conscience in a way that's actually going to help them see it? I now need to see what I'm actually made for. So if I'm talking to Muslim, I go, okay, what was the purpose for creation? When God made this universe, what was he making it for? And this is a bigger theological concept. And this question, I say, normally doesn't land, but discussing around it, I think, is helpful. So I'd say most Muslims I've spoken to don't have a concept of this. And the ones that then do, sometimes there's suggestions about just because he wanted to, or because he needed something, and you can push those aside. Those can't be reasons, because if God needs us or wants us in order to be satisfied, then God is no longer self-sufficient. God is no longer God. He's actually dependent upon creation in order to be something. But if you dig into God created all things to reveal who he is, to show who he is, to bring glory to his name, I find that they will happily agree with that and go, yes and amen. All things are
Mm-hmm.
about God. All things resound to the glory of God, or should do. And now if we take that backdrop, if I, as a part of creation, exist to reveal God for the greatness of who he is, that my existence is for him and his glory, and yet my entire existence has been, what do I want? What do I desire? What do I think is best? Then suddenly I see the problem. I'm living as though the world revolves around me, rather than living as though it revolves around him. And
Mm.
now I think you start to feel the weight of just how serious this rebellion is.
Well, that's, what that reminds me of is all the parenting books that I read
Mm,
that talks about getting to the heart of your children, because that's the whole point of it, is that, you can raise children to be obedient,
mhm.
but if you don't have their hearts, as soon as they turn 18,
Yep.
they just rebel and they're gone.
Yep.
And so the whole premise of all of these parenting books that I'm going through, because I'm in the throes of it currently,
Mm,
is getting to the heart of what's going on in your child's heart. And so I think this is a great opportunity for mums to actually be able to practice this. Like, we have a whole field to be able to practice every day
mm,
with our children, to be like, how are we getting to the heart? And it's hard to
mhm.
do. And I
Mhm.
have prompts around the house, and, I'm reading books about specific questions to try and
Mhm.
bring out this heart attitude of,
Mm.
what did you do to your brother? Why did you do this? What was the
Mhm.
cause of that? What does God
Mhm.
call us to?
Yeah.
And so this is a great opportunity for us, I'm just thinking now, to be able to practice this with our children, which we should be doing anyway, but
Mhm.
then to be able to utilize these skills in evangelizing to Muslims, because it's the same thing. It's the same thing of, I'm trying to teach my child that they are sinful and rebellious against God. And the same thing with the Muslim, or with anyone. It's always the same.
Yes.
It's we're trusting in our good works. We think we're a good person.
Yes.
Like, that's just the devil's lie 101 is,
Yep.
you're a good person,
Yep.
and so you don't need God.
Yep. Yep.
So that's really, prompted some thoughts to be able to practice with my own children, which
There
I
you
didn't
go.
think was going to be
Yeah.
happening.
When you start building that, hopefully there's a development where there's agreement and understanding. Now, this might take time, because if someone's been told their entire life, you're not the problem, and then you come along and say, actually you are,
Yep.
there's a tension there. But I think the logic of it is extremely sound. We exist for God, and yet we live as though we're more important. And you can actually show this out in the way that Muslims practice the 5 pillars. And this will tie into his mercy and his justice and that sort of stuff. Because if I think about how it plays out, if I have to pray 5 times a day for a total of about 1 hour, and
Mm-hmm.
that's what makes me consistently right before God, the reality is 1 hour a day is like 5% of the day. That means I give 5% of my time to God, like a little tax, and 95% of the day I can do what I want. I'm living as
Mm-hmm.
though I'm way more important than the creator of the universe, because my time is spent really only serving him rightly this amount, and that covers for the rest. That's like I'm living for me, but I just pay him what he sort of needs to. I've paid him off so that is not on my tail. If I think about the fasting that Ramadan talks about, it's not really fasting as every other religious belief has held it. Fasting by other religions is not eating food. Whereas
Yep.
in Islam, fasting is absolutely gorging myself before sunrise and after sunset, and then fasting in the middle of the day. So one, it's a total indulgence of eating as much as I can. But two, it's a act of public glorification, because I'm doing this. So one of the critical things that Jesus talks about with fasting, and this comes to the motives again, is not letting other people know, specifically trying to look like
Yeah.
you're not fasting,
Yes.
rather than actively trying to present that you are. And it's even worse, actively trying to present that you are whilst actually gorging yourself as well. And so
Yeah.
there's these things where the way it functions has the outward appearance of righteousness, when the reality is that the heart is the problem. And so trying to develop this. And so one way that I've tried, and I have limited success, but I think it's very powerful when it's understood, is that in Islam, the worst sin, the only sin that will damn you forever, is to say, or one of the sins that will damn you forever, is to say that God has a partner, God has an equal. This is their primary argument regarding the Trinity. They go, Jesus cannot be God, because that's saying there's multiple gods. This is idolatry, right? But if I think about what I do every time I rebel, if sin is to say, I'm going to live as though the world revolves around me and just pay God off what he needs from me so I can basically live however I want the rest of the time, then suddenly, what am I doing? I'm not even living like I'm equal with God. I'm living like I'm more important. That even when I do what he asks, all I'm doing is what he asks, so that in the end I get from him what I want. And so if I start fleshing this out, because the system of Jannah and Jahannam, Jannah being heaven for Muslims, is that heaven is a place where, if I've been found worthy based on my performance, God will give me the desires of my heart forever. You've likely heard of the 72 virgins. That's not explicitly true, but it's representative. It's this idea that whatever my heart desires, God will serve me forever. if I deny myself of certain things here, I'll be able to indulge in them forever after.
Yeah, okay.
And now you see that the whole system is me-centric. God is this cosmic genie. It's this one who, if I do the right things now, although I'm doing it entirely for what I get out of it, at the end, he'll give me whatever I want. He will serve me hand and foot.
Yeah.
Which is the role of a servant, not of a sovereign God. And so I think as you start fleshing this out and looking at the implications of how their system views God and humanity, you can start seeing the issues, because God isn't God. Although they would say he absolutely is in practice, our actions speak louder than words. And if I live like he exists to give me what I want, and he's okay with my partial sort of symbolic commitment to him rather than actually loving and serving him, then and it's a system that ultimately is me-centered, not God-centered.
That's so interesting, because I've thought this before, and I think I'm probably not the only person, that the 5 pillars that you're talking about, Ramadan, not eating, fasting, and praying 5 times a day, I look at that and I think, wow, that's real dedication. Like, those people are really serious. And you think, oh, they must be, the thought behind that is they must be selfless. They must be genuine in their desire to serve God. But what you're saying, that makes total sense of, the fasting is proclaimed everywhere. Like, it's proclaimed all over social media. Our prime minister pretends to, be involved in this fasting, and every politician pays their respects, and, there's things, shrines at the local libraries towards it. So everyone knows that a Muslim will be fasting right now. So it can be a badge of honor, be like, yeah, I'm so good because I'm fasting and doing this, but you're gorging yourself at sunset and sunrise. That, which, if I eat a solid breakfast in the morning, I'm not hungry till lunchtime, and then it's only a couple hours to actually deny my body of what it wants. Whereas, as you said, in the Christian fast, it's, you're not telling anyone. You are actually meant to be, well, there's no prescriptions for it, but it's generally you're doing it for a longer period of time, not just till sunset and then gorging yourself. And the whole point is to be denying your flesh and be praying to God and using his strength so that we don't live by bread alone. Like, it's completely different, but it looks like it's more spiritual and more disciplined when you're just looking at their religion. Yeah, that's super interesting.
And I think this begins to bring up some of the massive differences that I think are overlooked. Because if you look at the Old Testament, over and over, there's this refrain, I desire obedience, not sacrifice. And in Christianity, Jesus really, really amps this up. It's famously in the Sermon on the Mount, Matthew 5-7, that the whole thrust is that our actions being right externally are insufficient. We need a different kind of righteousness. Our heart needs to be righteous. And this ties in. So Jesus' greatest commandment in Matthew 22, 37 and 38 is to love the Lord your God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength. And the second one, love your neighbor as yourself. Like the Christian ethic that is brought to us by Jesus, which is actually just a quotation of the Torah, is that we are to, with all that God has given us, to love and serve him and others. It's all about him and other people. It's not about us. And then the measure by which we're going to be judged from Leviticus 19:2 and Matthew 5:48, both Torah and Gospel, Torah and Injil, is that we will be judged because we must be holy or perfect as our Father in heaven is perfect. The standard is, have we accurately reflected God, living the way that he calls us to in our motives and our expressions through our actions, of a life that loves God with all our heart, soul, mind, and strength, and loves our neighbor as ourselves. And I think that when I start bringing that to bear on the conscience of the Muslim, that this is who God ought to be in our own mind and our own actions, hopefully, if the Spirit of God is at work in their heart, they're going to begin to see and understand that mere token-based actions, ticking of lists, is insufficient to please a holy God that deserves all devotion and all commitment and all service.
Yeah. And an analogy that I use, which I'm sure you've heard before, but maybe some listeners haven't, is when trying to understand the holiness and perfection of God and then our state before him is, if I slap you in the face, you might slap me back, and that'll be the consequence for that action. If I slap a police officer in the face, I might have to pay a fine. do some community service, that'll be the consequence for that action.
Mm-hmm.
If I then go and slap Trump in the face,
Mm-hmm.
there will be a higher
Mm-hmm.
payment for that, whatever
Mm-hmm.
he decides that to be.
Yep.
Or, the same action was to you, to the police officer, to person in the highest authority that there is, but the consequence for that action is different because of who I did it against.
Yep.
So
Yes,
when we sin,
the deserved honor of the person determines the deserved justice for violating that honor.
Yeah. Do you have any other analogies or things that you use to try and bring this home to people want to understand it?
On that, the first thing a Muslim is going to say to that analogy, or basically any analogy that uses human people and human authorities to compare them to God, is you can't compare God to humanity. You can't compare. God is not like a person. God is not like a. And so if you do use that sort of example, you can say, I'm comparing, you can try and use it, but you're basically saying, I'm comparing authorities here, and basically saying, if God deserves infinite honor, then the punishment for defying him should be infinitely greater. And it has some weight, but this is my struggle. Most of our analogies use human experiences that accurately present truths about God, but often because they're human experiences, they get sidelined or pushed away when engaging with someone who says you can't compare God to that because God is holy, God is other. And so there's lots of them. There's an example about a policeman who sees a crime going on, and then the person is caught, but the person merely says, I've done wrong, please forgive me, I'll pray to you 5 times today, and I'll do some good things over here, please let me off. And the policeman obviously can't, because justice must be satisfied. And so in the same, there's an example that helpfully demonstrates what we know of justice, but normally is brushed aside. So what I normally rely on is actually not analogies, because analogies normally trip up and make the conversation harder, because you then get into discussing the legitimacy of the point the analogy is making rather than the point it's making. And so
and on that, like I remember hearing someone say theology by analogy is deadly, which it is. And I strayed away from analogies for a while because I thought, exactly what you're saying. But then I have been thinking recently, I do need to bring some back, because you need some sort of thing within your life that can help be like, okay, that's a helpful thought to step forward, but not to end there for sure.
Yes. So what you can do, here's another helpful way of using the analogy, is you go, I'm using the analogy to explain justice. So here's how we understand justice, not how we understand God. So I'd use an analogy that helps us go, when we use the word justice as humans, this is what we're referring to.
Yep.
So then when that word is found in Holy Scripture or in a holy text, then that's what I'm expecting the word to mean. You would have to give me reason to think differently of that word, because this is what our context of the word refers to. And so I think that is helpful. Yes, I often use analogies, but I don't use them as the foundation of what I believe. Rather, I use them as explainers of what I think is true. So, but how am I then navigating this with a Muslim? Is I think I just constantly pointing and picking at, often because I say you've raised this, perpetrators, not victims, right? We're not the one who, we're not a victim of the temptation, or a victim of this. Rather, it's looking at. And so you can, the analogy of actual real existence. You go, so when you lied, why did you do it? I use this one with males, but like you ask them, like, have you ever looked at pornography or whatever? And they go, oh yeah, of course, all the time. And it's like, okay, so when you typed in that URL and then clicked go, was that like an accident, or did you willfully do that after getting yourself in private, blah, 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 doing all this stuff? It's like willful, and then indulgence. Like, this isn't you slipping into a sneaky trap set by someone else. This is active planning and a choice to go, I'm going to indulge in this for the service of what I want. And so I think fleshing that out is you can show that in a number of scenarios. I think that starts to build it, as well as the other thing is asking about, why are you doing this? Why do you do your prayers? Why do you do these things? And I think that it just starts bearing this weight that if you go, this isn't just me suggesting something, when you reflect on your actual life, it begins to go, actually, this is how I live. This guy is accurately describing who I am as a person, and actually just accurately describing who humanity are as people. And so how do I then move from that? Is I then go either one of two options. Either I look back at that idea of a shirk of saying God has a partner and go, what is the deserved punishment from saying that someone is equal to or greater than God? And the answer is eternal punishment. So sometimes I can use that direction where I go, so if your whole life you've lived as though it's all about you and you do what God says only to get what you want, you've acted as though you are equal with or above God and his existence is for you. That would be shirk. So but that one rarely lands because that's a little bit more ethereal. But the other one is if I'm just constantly living actively in disobedience against God, if my whole life is me doing what I want, then why would it stop when I die? So even if you think the punishment for individual actions is finite, if I'm going to do them continually or infinitely, then the punishment has to last forever. And so often there's this assumption in their mind that upon death I can't do any more wrong things. But why does rebellion stop when you cease to be here? What about all the crimes of this love for yourself that's going on in your mind, even if you don't have a physical body in the afterlife, in their existence? And so pointing that out, you're trying to really amp up. Actually, this is more serious than you thought because you're a perpetrator who has defied the one who deserves all honor and praise and glory. And either way you cut it, you've got an eternal existence that will continue of you rebelling against him.
Yeah.
And so then come up the disagreements. Okay, but God is forgiving. God is merciful. God does these things.
God is all merciful.
So yeah.
No, that makes a lot of sense and very helpful. Yep, I would like to think, yes, I have, even when talking about justice with Muslims and how Allah can be just and the need for God to be just, then it always comes back. But Allah is all merciful. Allah is all merciful. And that's just, the mercy covers any sort of idea of justice then. What's your response to that?
Yeah. So there's a number of things to start there. Number one, Allah is given 99 names. One is that he is most merciful. Another one is that he is utterly just. Okay. So in the list of names given to Allah that are meant to accurately describe who he is, both of them have to be true.
Yep.
So that's critical. And another thing to add to that is that mercy without justice isn't mercy. Mercy without justice is wickedness.
Permission,
It's endorsement, permission. That's great. Because you think about it and you go, well, someone who has the authority to punish evil and doesn't is giving their stamp of approval to evil. They're endorsing evil. They're saying, you can do that.
Yep.
And so how do we start? We have to now knock down, I'd say, some of these arguments. And so getting a definition of what justice is, what mercy is, what forgiveness is really helpful. An agreed definition. Because they throw out these terms, but they throw out these terms often in a way that doesn't actually fit the scenario they're describing. So, for example, you can ask them, do you believe that Allah is just? Yes, he is. Allah is just. Okay, define justice for me. What do you think that word means? What do we when we both say that we think God is just? What are we agreeing on about this justice? What are we agreeing on? And so getting an agreed definition is super helpful. And so justice, normally you end up with a definition around the God will give things what they deserve. Because justice is both elevating the one who's been on the receiving end of injustice and punishing the one who's been doing said injustice. So it's giving people what they deserve. It's elevating the broken and humbling or punishing the prideful. That's a word. And so there's that one. So you get that definition of justice, giving people what they deserve. Then now let's define what mercy is. Because you say Allah is most merciful, and I happily agree that God is most merciful. But what's that mean? And then here's where the definition is really critical, because often, if you think about a Muslim system, you asked the question before about how does a Muslim get to heaven, this actually plays into it. Mercy is, in their system, normally, not being punished for what you deserve, caveat, because of the stuff you've done. It's this, you receive mercy in Islam on the basis of performance. And so Muslims tell a whole host of different stories that they've been given to emphasize this. So one that's very common is there's a guy who's killed 100 people. And he goes to an imam and he says to the imam, okay, I've killed 100 people, but I want to repent. I want to be forgiven by God. And the imam says, no, you can't. And he kills him. So he's now killed 101 people. Now he's on his way to another imam, and he's on his way there, and on his way he dies. Now, what's Allah going to do? He's killed 101 people, but he wants to repent. And then it's like, okay, well, if he's closer to the next guy than he was to the previous guy, then he'll receive mercy. Okay. He's not. Okay, I'll move him where his body was when he died, so he is closer, so he can get mercy. And it's like, wow, Allah is so merciful. But the reality is, the only reason the guy receives mercy is because of his own apparent deservedness of mercy, because he's seeking it. We haven't looked at his motive for seeking it, or forgiveness, or whatever's going on. It's just he seems to deserve it, and so Allah gives it to him. Mm-hmm. Another one that you hear is there's a guy, a bad guy, who has killed 100 people. Apparently, lots of people have killed 100 people, but he's killed 100 people, and then there's another guy who's a really good guy, and the really good guy kicks a dog down a well, and the guy that murdered 100 people climbs down the well and saves the dog. And then they both die, and the really good guy goes to hell because he kicked the dog, and the murderer goes to Jannah because he goes to heaven because he's saved the dog. And it's like, wow, God is so merciful. And so all of the stories are about how someone's own transformation, someone's own change, someone's actions bring about Allah viewing them as deserving of mercy. And so this is where the problem lies, is mercy has been upended, because mercy, by its actual definition, is not getting what you deserve. Yep. So when you look at it in sport and in baseball, if a team's ahead by so much at a certain point, it's the mercy rule. We're not going to keep playing. We're going to stop the game there, because it would be way too shameful or embarrassing for us to win by so much more than we already have. It's a team who they don't no longer send out their best pictures. They start sending out other guys who are in training or in practice rather than their best guys. So it's less embarrassing. The mercy rule is, we could do this. We totally have the right to do this to you, but we won't, even though we could. That's mercy. And so, and so when you bring that, and so let's actually define mercy correctly. You don't get what you deserve. And now we have a tension. Justice, you get what you deserve, or evil gets what it deserves. Mercy, you don't receive what you deserve. In the definitions, we start to see a tension, which comes to the third thing that gets raised. Well, God is most forgiving. God can just forgive. But what is forgiveness? Well, if I loan you $1,000, here's an analogy. If I loan you $1,000, I loan you $1,000, right? And at some point, you are unable to pay that money back. And I say, even though you owe me $1,000, I will cancel that debt. You don't have to pay me. That's forgiveness. But there's a really critical thing that I think gets overlooked. Forgiveness requires the forgiver to pay. The forgiver foots the cost. The reason I use money in this example is because it's easy to demonstrate. If I've lent you $1,000, my bank account is $1,000 less than it would otherwise be. So when I choose to not ask it back from you, what I'm inherently saying is, I will foot the bill that you owe. I've paid the $1,000. Yep. And it happens, any forgiveness looks like this. If someone publicly shames me and I choose to take the shame rather than retaliate, and I forgive them, what I'm doing is I'm footing the bill by the detriment to my public image or whatever. Yeah. And so that's what forgiveness is. And so forgiveness is that the forgiver satisfies justice in order to give mercy. And now we've got we've got something that's really critical. So we've got humanity, we're the perpetrators, we're evil, we're the ones who live our entire existence for ourselves and not for God. That deserves punishment from God forever because it is ongoing and because of the seriousness of the action. And in order for God to acquit any single one of us, he must satisfy justice in order to grant mercy. So how can God pay what we owe? How can God satisfy the justice that we deserve to receive in order to give forgiveness and mercy?
Yeah.
And if you're in a system where God is other and separate and distant and would never by any stretch of the imagination become human, then you have no hope. And the Muslim will hopefully say, so what you're telling me is everyone goes to hell. There's no chance. And you can say, well, if this described is true and I've accurately represented what these things mean, yes. But have you heard about the God who entered his own creation to save sinful humans? Now we see why God himself must become a human, because the only way that we can be reconciled to God is if God pays what I owe.
Yeah.
And now I've got to the heart of why the Trinity is necessary, Jesus' divinity and humanity is necessary, and why the only hope for me to have life with God and forgiveness is if God himself pays.
That's really helpful. Yeah. Understanding there still has to be a payment because mercy can't just cover this. Somebody still has to pay. That's really helpful. Thanks for that. So I guess taking this back to primarily I'm talking to women who are younger women or mums with young kids, and we're wanting to engage with Muslims, wanting to evangelize. We might see them at the park, we might see them at markets, we might see them swimming lessons, you know, these sort of areas. It's a different context to street evangelism per se. What I've been doing to go up to people is just saying, are you a Muslim? Which usually is quite obvious. And then, you know, one lady was like, well, obviously. And I was like, well, some people actually do wear cultural head things. Anyway, and then I say, how did you become a Muslim? That's what I'm trying to just engage with them to, you know, what's that connection point of seeing someone and trying to engage with them. That's what I've been doing. And then from there, understanding, okay, why are they a Muslim? How did they become a Muslim? Because some people will say, I was born Muslim. That's my culture. A lot of people say that, actually. I was born Muslim, grew up in a Muslim house.
Yeah.
Whereas in
I've
Christianity,
never been offered any other options. This is just what I've given. Yeah.
Whereas in Christianity, it should be different. You can't be born a Christian. If you are, then there's problems there. Anyhow, what would you recommend in your approach to that, or have any tips for mums?
So I'll say I haven't evangelized many Muslim women. I'll have you know they have quite strict rules, but what I do know is I'm leaning on what I've learnt from other missionaries in Muslim contexts is that their way is normally ongoing relationship and development, where the initial conversation is actually the basis of a relationship rather than the attempt to communicate the whole thing at once. So Muslim communities are normally their power is in the community aspect of what's going on. It's the we all are together, we all think like this, and we're very supportive of each other. And this is demonstrated in the suburb I used to live in. There's a mosque there, and there's a few Muslim real estate agents who are just getting absolute deals. Like, I remember there was one street, 8 houses in a row sold in like a month. Every single house that sold, and this guy was the real estate agent who got the deals on, because he's serving his community by helping them move to a place that has access to the rest of the community and to the mosque and stuff like that. And so, so with that in mind, knowing that it's a community-based thing, I think that's really helpful, that your one conversation. Now, God is sovereign, and by His Spirit He works, but we often see that He works through a means, not just through individual scenarios, where there will be a beginning of the opportunity to have ongoing depth of engagement, and your words will be heard with power if you're demonstrated to care more about them than just, I think you're wrong.
Yeah.
And so I think that that's really critical, and that will happen by time where relationships are built and formed, which provide opportunities for further conversations I could never have because I can't be in a house with Muslim women, sort of thing.
Yes.
And so I think
Yeah.
that's the testimony I've had from people who are over in the Muslim world engaging at length, is that their wives are having great impact by being a part of the community and developing relationships and friendships. And so I think that's critical. But the other thing that's really helpful is and this may not be a problem for you, but it often is becoming a problem in the West, is that we're increasingly, by the way that we engage with basically anyone under 35 in the West, is a little bit snowflakey in the sense that they don't prefer direct confrontation and information. They can't really handle accurate or active disagreement. Rather, it has to be the offering of opinions and ideas. And so evangelism to under 35 white people is often harder to navigate because you have to be proposing things more carefully in the early stages for that to be heard. Arab cultures, Muslim cultures are normally way happier with direct disagreement. They respect you more if you stand your ground, and the intensity and passion with which you hold to something actually communicates the truthfulness of it in your own mind. And so there's some Muslim debates where the Christian apologist absolutely, from a Western perspective, absolutely wipes the floor intellectually with the Muslim apologist, where I watch it, I go, he has absolutely slaughtered with the intellectual accuracy and the way he's critiqued these points. But the Muslim world watching the same debate goes, the Muslim guy won because he got angry, so furious at the points. Why? Because his passion communicates how true this is. And so knowing that, there's I think a need to be flexible in the way that I engage, that I'm allowed to be passionate without being rude or condescending, that I'm allowed to be passionate about the Jesus that I know and the life transforming power. And I'm allowed to push hard and say true and hard things because that communicates the truthfulness of what I'm saying to someone from that culture. So probably the best example of this is one day I was out using a flip chart in the city, one of the ways we used to present the gospel, and I had four Muslim guys there who were basically mocking a little bit. One guy was the particular ringleader, and I get to this point where he starts mocking Jesus, and this is not my normal temperament, but he gets to this point, he's mocking Jesus, and I look at him and I go, how dare you? Like, how dare you mock the God who came to save sinners? Like who do you think you are? Right? And I point, and the conversation shifted. Like, what seemed to me in the moment as a moment of at the time unrighteous fury or frustration actually was used because of the sort of cultural differences, that he actually took me more seriously because of that. And so I'd propose there may be a willingness to go against the normal temperament that the Western culture has taught us about carefulness and gentleness, that actually will be beneficial in engaging, that passion communicates truth in a Muslim context.
Yep. No, this has been really helpful. And I think to anyone who's thinking about this, I mean, there's a lot of people who are thinking about this, particularly since recent events in our world, thinking about how we need to engage with Muslims. And just do it. Something that Wes Huff said the other day, which I found really helpful, is people are often waiting till they have this perfect gospel presentation till they actually go and evangelize. But so often all we actually need to do is step up to the plate. And, you know, it's a tactic of the devil to think, okay, you can't do it. You're too fearful, to leave you in your fear. Whereas you're actually never going to get better if you never step up to the plate. So for sure, maybe your first presentation is terrible, but thanks be to God, he doesn't work according to our efforts. It's the Holy Spirit who is the one who is working. So I hope if you are listening to this, that you are encouraged to take those opportunities. There are Muslims throughout all of our culture, and be intentional about your interactions with Muslims. There are so many at the playgrounds and parks, or swimming lessons, or in your school at school pickup. Wherever it might be, take these opportunities when you see them and ask God for these opportunities, and he will give you the wisdom that you need to, have when you do speak to them. You'll learn from things. I'm trying to do this myself currently, and I'm learning so much. Thankfully, Matt has been able to clarify a lot of things today, which has been super helpful. But take those opportunities. And for someone, but yeah, just take those opportunities. Take those opportunities. So for someone who is wanting to learn more about how to engage with Muslims well and learn more about Islam and learn more about Islam and learn more about Islam, is there certain resources that you can point people to, whether it be books or podcasts or other things that can help with this?
Yes, I can. I'll just add two things to your last comment. Two things that really comfort me in the evangelism space is God's more committed to the salvation of sinners than I am. Like when I pray and ask him to use me, to include me in what he's doing, I'm not twisting his arm to get him interested in something that he's not interested in. Like God is in the business of saving sinners for the glory of his name. And so when I pray, include me in what you're doing, God answers prayers that resound to his glory. And I take great comfort in that. And because he's more committed, the transformation of their heart isn't on the basis of my understanding or my knowledge or my wisdom. It's actually on the basis of him being at work. And so I think that's great comfort and confidence as a person in this space. What resources? I think Nabil Qureshi, absolutely brilliant. Is a Muslim who became a Christian over a long time. And so I think that Nabil Qureshi is great. And I'll say this, David Wood, very helpful. Look and understand his content. Be careful about which aspects of his content you use, and be careful about not just imitating him in the way he delivers it. So he does do a good job of showing the seriousness of stuff with passion. So don't get me wrong. And I think there have been hundreds, if not thousands or more Muslims who've been reached. Nabil Qureshi David Wood was the guy who spoke with Nabil Qureshi and engaged. And so they're the two I think are the most helpful. Nabil Qureshi now gone to glory, but you can read his book, Seeking Allah, Finding Jesus. And those have really good ways of explaining things. But I think, yeah, those two would be my highest guys. But David Wood pairs with a number of other guys as a apostate prophet who is an ex-Muslim as well. And there's a few others there. But the one thing I think to be careful of is it's very easy when researching Islam to start viewing Muslims as Islam personified rather than as people who need to know the Savior. And so I think that's the critical thing, is to learn the balance between understanding a system that a person is a part of and a victim of, and understanding an individual and caring for an individual, and not just being there to slaughter the theories and ideas of Islam, but actually to care for someone, to love someone, to know someone, and to introduce them into the Savior who transformed your life. And so most Muslim apologists that are effective, as we were talking about before, know that passion communicates truth in Muslim context, but I think use that wisely. Don't die on every hill, and don't be a fool by passionately, absolutely attacking something that then leads to you having to backtrack later. And so be careful, but I say David Wood is probably the best content guy, but learn his content to understand Islam well, but primarily apply it as a person who's trying to communicate why we need a God who would enter his own creation to save us. So that's what I would propose.